If you've been thinking about getting serious with your money, like actually serious, now's the time. The Motley Fool is offering new members 50% off their iconic stock recommendation service, Stock Advisor. This is the same service that's crushed the market with recommendations that have returned 1,057% since inception, compared to the S&P 500's 180% over that same period. This isn't guesswork. The Motley Fool has a track record of finding companies before they become household names. So if you want to invest smarter and you like saving money while doing it, go to fool.com/listen to claim your 50% off discount off a 1-year term of Stock Advisor. Again, that's fool.com/listen. Returns of 1,057% are from the Motley Fool's product Stock Advisor and measured against S&P 500 returns of 180% as of July 10th, 2025. Past performance is not an indicator of future results. All investing involves a risk of loss. Individual investment results may vary.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to what is sort of a new venture. This is the Countryside News segment, although patrons will actually recognize this as the second attempt at this because, well, the first one was kind of fueled by red wine, although now we've tried to do it properly and do it so the public can hear it. But we are still the only rural news program where we have to finish early because one of us is going out wildfowling.
Yeah. This is. Can you imagine how much more popular the news would be if they go and say we haven't got time for Anne finally because the wind's blowing and I've got to go and try and hopefully get underneath some ducks. Yes, I'd much prefer the news if that was the case. So anyway, we're here for a short time, not a good time, Richard.
Yes.
So what's our first news story going to be?
Well, this one, it's I think we got it from the Farmers Weekly. It's Emma Gilbard, and it's how environmental schemes are affecting UK arable area. And it's, in a nutshell, it's according to the survey taken for the AHDB Spring 2025 Planting and Variety Survey, just over half of English farmers reduce their croppable arable area to take part in agri-environment schemes for Harvest 2025. Across the whole of the UK, this figure dropped to 42.3. So it's where's this balance between food production and nature and where the schemes exist and how incentivized people are to do one over the other. I know you've got a better handle on this because we don't have any crops over here. We've just got sheep and cows.
No, I mean it's an interesting one, and it worked okay because basically, if you look at it, I mean the best way that farmers were doing it, both for their bottom line and I would argue for nature, was that they were making the land that was profitable and sustainable for growing crops. They were using that as a cropped area, and then through things like yield mapping and also just knowledge of their own land, they would turn the edges, awkward corners, etc., into areas where they would, so if you've got a field that looks like the Isle of Wight in shape, is that you would square it off into a rectangle, so therefore it's much more economical to farm. And all those little sort of gullies and canyons and bits that stick at awkward angles, squared them off, and that was where the stewardship options went. Now, I think one of the reasons why it probably has gone up in such a big way is because some of the options under SFI were very, very generous. Some of the legume-rich fallows and some of the wildflower options were so incredibly generous that some farmers thought, do you know what? Okay, so for year one is a bit costly because I've got to go and put the seed in and make it sure it actually grows. But then after that, I don't have to do anything with it. And with wheat, was they said, well, wheat this year is going to be really low, the soothsayers said, and they were right. So therefore, it was actually quite a sensible move. Now, you see, I was a bit more sanguine about it because I thought, well, most farmers would rather go and grow a crop because that's what they do. And so therefore the stewardship options, so we're saying, well, because X amount of croppable area has been lost, isn't actually the end of the world. But we've now all of a sudden got a lot of land being slated to come into solar. And so if we were to keep up with the amount of land being lost as a croppable area, and plus the solar as well, you do suddenly start thinking, oh my lord. But you can understand it when wheat prices were so shocking this year that you can understand why people could go into it. So I think in a way the story it does, that down to the 42.3% of land getting cropped. That's a story, but I think it's suddenly going to ramp up that bit more, because it's not just the stewardship options, it's the it's solar too. So this is actually quite a story, and one that may affect potentially, I think, if we were to get a reform government in next time. They've already intimated that they're much more interested in food sufficiency and food sustainability grown in this country. We might suddenly see a bit of a drop. So in the stewardship areas. So interesting.
As we've said before as well, these things don't happen very quickly. You can't just say, right, well, this year we're doing nature, and then next year we'll do crops, and then the year after that we'll do solar. Once you've changed the use of a field and all the access to it and the gateways and the way it's laid out or put, in the case of solar, some great big concrete lumps in the ground and some steel uprights and fencing to keep people out and all of these other things, you can't change it back into something else very quickly. So once that is lost as croppable area, it's quite a bit of work to turn it back into a food production area, particularly with modern machinery.
I agree entirely, and I think one of the things that I think is where we probably lost the SFI, where there were some farmers and agents who were advising their clients to, well, take advantage of this because this current scheme looks almost too good to be true. So let's get some money out of it whilst we can. Was understandable, I suppose, if you're an agent, because they're getting paid via a percentage of the profits that the farm is earning that year. But it was very short-termism, and it didn't in the end go to help the farmers who are actually doing stewardship for the right reasons. And what's not said in this piece is about solar, and I think one of the big stories really is the fact that if you look now, the cows, if you pardon the pun, are actually coming home, and we now understand that a lot of the sort of almost the inheritance tax and the swinging impacts on farming, what seems to be becoming clear now, it was just a means of coercing farmers into moving in the direction of moving fields over into renewables, because we've seen recently in the news that in the reshuffle, one of the few people who didn't get reshuffled was Mr. Miliband. So clearly he's got some pull. So there we go. Is it good for us? Probably not. Is it good for nature? Probably not.
No, and it's too simple a metric by which to understand what's going on. As well.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very complicated situation, and none of these things will either be created or be resolved quickly, sadly. Speaking of which, here's a slightly more complicated issue, but one that I thought was mostly gone, but maybe it is, and maybe it's got a lot of noise behind it at the moment. And I can sort of see two elements to this, and one is Helena Horton's piece in The Guardian today, which is right to swim in wild camp in England should be enshrined in law, Labour MPs say, and then a report from a group of MPs from the all-party parliamentary group for outdoor recreation and access to nature. So that is listed there as being a Labour-led all-party group. Straight away, and then we've got the report here as well. But there's some interesting language going on here with all party and then Labour led. Which are two that you can't be both.
No, you can't.
It's not all party if there's only.
Many moons ago, I was involved in the all-party parliamentary group for horse racing and thoroughbred breeding. I know, very long-winded. That was an interesting one because anybody and everybody could be on this group, provided they had a race course in their constituency or one of the training centres, so Lambourne, Newmarket, Midland, Malton. And that meant
That's a big chunk of the middle of England. Yeah.
Yes, that was a big old chunk of that. But plus, if you think about it, you could have an MP for Doncaster or Redcar, absolutely dyed-in-the-wool old school Labour. But then you might also have the MP for Newmarket, the MP for Epsom and whatnot. So it genuinely was an all-party thing. And my only experience of it was twofold. This is slightly off the topic of the news, but it was that you didn't get them all sitting together. I went to a dinner every year, and the Labour people sat at one end, the Liberal Democrats sat in the middle, and the Tories sat at the other end of the room. So it wasn't exactly a collegiate thing. And the second thing was I watched Matt Hancock skip in and slap Priti Patel on the backside. So that's completely not to do with the news, I know, but it just sort of showed me the sort of man that Matt Hancock is, because he used to be the MP for Newmarket. But anyway, on to the all-party parliamentary group thing. Now, I think this is one of those weird talking shops that they've all come to a conclusion that sounds so right on and so wonderful that it would almost take a 3-hour program to go through most of this lunacy that they've come up with. But one of the biggest takeaways that I saw in there, which actually worried me, was not just the one that they want all stiles to be ripped up and replaced with accessible field gateways. In other words, is every single stile in the country has got to be ripped up, and it now means that people with disabilities or age-related infirmities. Can you imagine the cost if we were to do this? That you were to put accessible stiles everywhere? That's bonkers, isn't it?
There's a lot in this document, and I would say there's a couple of ways to read it. One, you could just read it based on what's in there. So we'll link out to it in the show notes. There's a lot of focus on rivers within this. That does seem to be the headline of this. Accessing blue spaces.
Blue spaces.
Yes, which is so as opposed to green spaces. And then there's access to nature, which is a very interesting way of putting things, because that infers that nature is there as a resource for humans.
Yeah.
That we need to access nature, which we do. I mean, you and I have both chosen work that puts us out in fields all the time and next to nature, but we're not. When I do my work, and I think you're the same, you're not there thinking all of this is there for me. You're sort of doing it in service to nature, a wild service, you might want to call it. Someone should write a book with that title. Yeah.
God.
But all of the framing in this document is about access to nature, as if nature is just a resource that's sat out there like a mineral deposit. And everyone should have a right to mine this mineral deposit. No, we need to actually do something to make sure that mineral deposit, that fixed resource, is still there for the future. I'm picking up on a few things here of the people involved in this. So the officers of this all-party parliamentary group are Andy McNay, Labour, Phil Brickell, Labour, Lord Hodgson of Astley Abbott, Conservative, and the treasurer there is Ms. Polly Billington. I don't know anything about Polly Billington, but I noticed that Kath Flitcroft, Dr. Flitcroft, from the British Mountaineering Council, is their public inquiry point. This all-party parliamentary group is effectively the British Mountaineering Council, which is worth noting, because they are sort of the lobbying group, sort of the sport representative for hill walking, or what is now called mountain hiking and climbing and things like that. So I used to be a member a long time ago. It was actually a requirement when I did my outdoor qualifications. You had to be a member of the British Mountaineering Council. Now, they were sort of the political arm of the Kinder Trespass, and back in the in the 30s, and the
Yeah.
sort of the war between hikers and gamekeepers there. So they are a very political organization. They have really moved their focus over the last few years to access. So they're in bed with Right to Roam. They also have this We Wild Camp campaign, which is simultaneously campaigning for access for wild camping whilst also educating people on how you should wild camp and what you should do. But in nothing on their nothing in their literature, nothing in their education do they talk about disturbance of habitat. They don't
No.
talk about destruction of habitat. Everything's to do with either litter or polluting water sources with sort of human bodily waste from toileting and those kind of things. But nothing is there about just being there as a human in nature, which we know has a huge effect on the security of those habitats for things that live there and want to be left the hell alone. So if you're looking at this and you're listening to this podcast as you're coming to it from the outdoors side of things, just bear in mind that this is basically the British Mountaineering Council talking to themselves, because Andy McNay is heavily involved with the British Mountaineering Council and mountaineering. He's an MP for Rossendale and Darwin, which is not exactly a huge area of biodiversity, but it has a lot of sensitive habitats in the uplands. You've also got Phil Brickle, who is he's a paddler. He's a kayaker. His thing has been access to water for kayaking. So within this group, I can't see, and I mean, obviously I don't know who's been reporting to them and making representation and so on, but there's nothing here from farming.
No.
There's nothing here from the field sports side of things. There's nothing here from any of those other stakeholders within this. And that's what I think will be what's missed from this, because we'll just get lots of tweets and X posts and everything else now from people saying, well, look at this. Isn't this ridiculous? Look at this. They've said a thing about stiles. There's lots of stuff to pick at in there. Did BASC approach them?
Goodness
did the Game
knows.
and Wildlife Conservancy Trust? Did the National Gamekeepers? Did the NFU? Did all these organizations, did they try to work with these groups?
Well, I can't believe that they. Well, I can't see any evidence of it. I mean, there's one that stuck out for me was that one of my pet hates at the moment is this thing called biodiversity net gain, or kicking the can down the road, as it's called. So basically, if at the moment, if you build a new development, which is perhaps on village edge. So in my neck of the woods, there's huge numbers of old home farms are now falling by the wayside. The ones that are right next to the village, they are now getting developed because for some reason they've sort of worked this out that it's brownfield, and they're all building housing developments called Lark's Rise and Lapwing Meadow and naming all the red listed species which no longer can go there because it's been replaced by
It's always the way, isn't it?
Yes, I know, and they just haven't seemed to quite got it yet. But there's a thing which is called biodiversity net gain. So the idea, I suppose, in principle is quite sensible, is that if you are going to build, then it beholds to the developer to pay for. So if you use 1 acre, it'd be 1.1 acre of similar habitat has to be improved, and they have to pay for that to be done. So if you have truly lost 1 acre of old meadowland, theoretically there should be 1.1 acres of meadowland replaced and made good for biodiversity net gain, right? So therefore, it's basically want to have your cake and eat it and kick the can down the road. Now, one of the things that's in this thing here is it says that biodiversity net gain aims for a 10% gain in biodiversity, but currently falls short in recognizing the value of undeveloped and informal use by local people. So BNG requirements should explicitly contribute to improved public access to nature alongside ecological benefits. So I think there you go, is that this is the direction that this is of travel here, is that they're saying alongside ecological benefits. So in other words, what they're saying is that okay, so we're going to go and put in this habitat which is essential, which has been lost for species X. We're going to put it back in, but it's also got to work alongside that people have access to it. So it's always been my big bugbear personally in all the stuff with right to roam and all that lot, is it's always about, is it good? People need nature. And they never ask the question, does nature need people? Which we know the answer is invariably no. They only want the people who actually do the good stuff for them. And even once we've done the good stuff, they'd rather we buggered off and got out of the way. So I think this is a rather glossily presented piece of work which doesn't seem to have a huge depth to it of people inputting stuff from across the viewpoints and of land use and landowners. It doesn't seem to have a lot of, well, this is a working countryside. All I'm seeing on this document is an incredibly racially and age diverse images of all the people going along. Though I have to say, though, largely it's not very many elderly people on there. There just seem to be lots of people of different races using the land, and nothing really saying about what impact this might have on nature or the people who grow the food that feed us, so that we're fit enough to go out paddling and hill walking and kayaking and riding very badly. I have to say, the image that they've got of these people riding, well, the lady on there, she's riding far too long, her heels are up, her hands are too low, she's got it's just shoddy, really. I mean, it's just in every shape or form. That just sums it up. We've got people riding on here who shouldn't be on a horse.
I love that is the thing that you've picked out of that. This is what you get. Well, there's a few things in there. Like, one of them appears to be a photo from Bavaria, I think, is actually a stock photo. Another one looks like it's from North America somewhere. That looks like one of those American campgrounds where there's a set aside fire circle and you park your RV next to it. They've actually weirdly chosen a lot of stock imagery rather than from other countries which have a completely different level of human population and population density and completely different land use history, which is interesting. There's got to be a route forward for this, because this has actually been the way of things for a long time for any kind of funding or anything like that. For outside of ag funding, everything has to do with people. That basically there's almost no funding for just doing a nature project. It has to be how you have to show how the local community or a set of stakeholders benefits from that thing. And I work in that world. So I'm having to come up with very clever projects that actually do have a good outcome for nature, while also fulfilling the requirements of that funding or the framework that we're working with, or some sort of local access to nature plan or something like that. So last week went round with the county biodiversity team on a dormouse project, because we do very well for dormouse here, the hazel dormouse. They're doing quite well in this sort of corner of northeast Wales. So we were looking at one of the projects that's there that monitors it, and that it takes one of the biggest monitoring projects takes place in a public access woodland. So a lot of the discussion was, right, how can we try and funnel people onto the footpath and keep them on the footpath and keep their dogs on the footpath, so that this big area over here becomes free from people, so that the dormouse have places to be, and we can sort out the grey squirrel problem separately and the habitat and everything else. But how do we keep the public access whilst keeping people funneled into those right areas? And another part of that is trying to do it with volunteers. So not just doing volunteer things for the sake of the volunteers, but actually working with volunteers like you or I would go out and look at a coppice or a hedgerow or something like that, and actually say, right, these are the factors at play here, and these, there is a cost to humans being here, so how can we make it as good as we can for nature whilst also allowing people here? There is a route forward for that. I don't think mass participation works in those kind of areas. You can't have thousands of people doing that at the same time. You can have like 10 at a time. And crucially, the outdoor organizations, which I see a lot of, and I'm quite aware of them from like basically a previous career, they have no interest in doing anything with farmers, landowners, or anything like that. They just want to focus entirely on the people that pay their membership fees and effectively their customers. Meanwhile, farming, shooting, field sports, they have no interest in dealing with the outdoor people because they don't pay their wages either. They don't pay their membership fees to it. I'm kind of a unicorn in that I sit in both worlds, and I think both are a bit crap. That would be my advice. If you're listening to this podcast and you're from the farming field sports side, you have to engage with the outdoor recreation side, because otherwise they're going to come in and they're going to eat your lunch and they're going to take over in this, because there are more people interested potentially in outdoor recreation than paying $2,000 to stand there and fish for salmon or stand on a peg. There's just the mass of people. There's more people interested in the outdoor recreation than are interested in shooting and fishing, which you're going to be outnumbered if you don't get a handle on this. You know, that's a rare bit of my actual politics coming out.
One of the things that intrigues me here, and I think this is an interesting one. Helena Horton's article is quite well written, and she leans to the left, as she always will do, and she hasn't possibly asked the questions. But a lot of this, it does seem to be that her article focuses on the right to swim and wild camp stuff, and this access to blue spaces. I've never heard that one before. I hear a lot of access to green spaces, but there's access to blue spaces. Now, one of the leading lights in the right to roam movement is Robert McFarlane, who has just written a book called Is a River Alive?, claiming that rivers have rights. Now, one would imagine that and I've read the book, and I wrote my review of it in The Critic, and I didn't really buy it, but it was beautifully written. There's all this stuff I didn't really buy. But if one is to follow his mantra, and one presumes because he is one of the leading advocates and probably the most famous advocate of the right to roam movement, if rivers have rights, one then presumes that, and I think now that obviously sentient beings have rights, don't they? Wasn't that something that suddenly came in under Boris Johnson? So one would presume that I wait now for the court cases where you're getting water voles going and being represented by one of the ambulance chasing law companies going after them. And indeed, it is something, as we talked about on the show, you and I, the other day, Richard, is that while Justice have already turned their laser-like focus onto the co-steering world, well then if they're looking at that, then surely the disturbance that would come if much of this all-party parliamentary group's wishes were granted, which, sorry to disappoint everyone, they won't be, because Labour has slightly bigger fish to fry. Number 10 is going to read this and go, yeah, thanks, and throw it away. But there is. Let's be honest. This is only something because this is country slides. We have to talk about rural issues. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I mean, to be perfectly frank.
I mean, whether they survive to the end of the week.
It's an interesting. Well, yeah, exactly. Do you remember your knock knock? Who's there? Keir who? Well, that's politics. But it's one of those things is that while Justice are looking at this, and we are inevitably going to see increased disturbance of wildlife from what these people are saying, and they haven't consulted, a more holistic group, then probably we are going to look at just the only people who are going to benefit from this aren't going to be people who actually want more access and go kayaking and climbing and walking and horse riding badly or wherever, any of those things. It's going to be not the wildlife either. It's going to be the lawyers who are going to go, great, I've got a thing here because I've got Dormouse v Ramblers Association, and off they go, and they'll be charging Knoxville. So I think that's, basically where we've come to, and that's the news stories we've got. We have just literally bumped into the fact that it looks like the Prime Minister. I mean, when you got the Times saying it's not a question of if, it's a question of when he goes, you do think, oh my Lord, we are on quite an interesting time going forward. It's there's people trying to go, and the mayor of Manchester is looking at how quickly he can resign and then get a seat so that he can then become an MP, so that he can then go and stand up again. We're in very febrile times, and so I suppose probably we shouldn't really worry too much about stuff such as all parliamentary party groups saying, all this stuff, because it's just going to become, shredded paper very soon, Richard. So I'm not, it gave Helen Horton something to write about, didn't it?
It did, but all this stuff will come back at some point. So if I would say, urge the rural side of things to stay engaged on the topic, and don't be complacent about it. Just keep one eye on it, at least. But I mean, if we were, as you say, if we were a real news program, we would have covered all sorts of things, like over 100,000 people turning up in London this weekend, or sort of seemingly an assassination last week in the US, which is probably going to change the political landscape for the next 50 years. Or there's all sorts of things happening in the Middle East, and God knows what's going to happen with that by next week. So, I mean, if we were a real news program, we'd have covered some of those, but we're not. So there you go.
Yeah. But what did we do instead? We said building stiles, stupid idea. Don't go swimming because you disturb water voles, and a bit worried about food because someone's putting solar panels and they might be destroying me AB8 and AB9 in the process. Yeah, there's the news for you. I better go off and shoot some ducks, hadn't I suppose?
All legally and ethically for food. If you're listening, Helena.
Absolutely. Yes, it's called wild food, by the way, that is called, because it is now the wildfowling season, and we've got some rough weather down on the coast, and so therefore I will be able to go and stand in a muddy marsh and not shoot anything and get windy, rather than just get there and get bitten by midges. So that's where I'm going. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ring a gamekeeper. That's what I'm going to do. Right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Let us know what you thought of the news show.
Thank you for listening to the news.
Bye-bye.